Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
All right. Hey, guys. Hope everyone's doing well. TLDR News EU. I'm so slow right now. Preemptive like. Original link, top of the description. My name's Connor if you're new. Hey, guys. I like to learn about things. Politics and stuff like this, included. Wow. A horrible intro. Let's just get started. Let's go. Hope everyone's doing well.
This video is brought to you by Brilliant.
Brilliant.
Since making his grand return to the Oval Office, US President Donald Trump has been turning the tariff switch on and off, shaking up Europe.
Sorry, how much does Europe really need US trade?
US President Donald Trump has been turning the tariff switch on and off, shaking up European economies and threatening to essentially collapse the €1.6 trillion transatlantic trade relationship. As such, the EU has stepped up to cast itself as the heavyweight liberal trade bloc that's open for business, with the European Commission President claiming, a la Trump, that many countries were now reaching out to Brussels for trade deals to offset Trump-related disruption. So in this video, we're going to look at the EU's pre-existing network of trade agreements.
Maybe I'm being a little too optimistic, but looking on the possible bright side, in a decade or two, I think we might all look back at this severing, not complete severing, but decoupling of relations between the USA and the EU as a...
Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Sorry, that was my other video, getting ready. We could look back at this as a positive, as a necessary severing before it gets too late down the line. You know what I mean? Is that being too optimistic?
Whether this network could be expanded to replace the US, and why the most effective solution might be to reduce internal barriers within the EU itself.
Like the intro music. How can
We've just
Europe
published a new issue of our official magazine, Too Long, which runs through the world's most influential people and how they wield their power. From Elon Musk's takeover to the power of Milei, or whether Jerome Powell can resist Trump. Read more by clicking the link in the description. First, let's start with some context. The US is the EU's largest export partner, accounting for around 20.6% of the bloc's total goods exports in 2024, with the most exported goods being pharmaceuticals and cars. Trump has slapped a 10% tariff across the board and a massive 25% on motor vehicles, which
I actually wouldn't have been surprised if China was the biggest trade partner with Europe. I'd be curious to know the difference.
has seriously hit tariff across the board and a massive 25% on motor vehicles, which has seriously hit Europe's big manufacturing economies and could cause GDP to shrink by 1.6% in Germany and 0.8% in France.
Sorry, purchaser, not trade overall. I'm sorry.
GDP to shrink by 1.6% in Germany and 0.8% in France, the bloc's two largest economies. What's more, it could get even worse. In 2 months, the US could reinstate its 20% tariffs on all EU imports, meaning less demand for these goods, which makes up around 2% of the EU's GDP. According to a worst-case scenario report by the Kiel Institute, if the US imposed 25% tariffs across the board and the EU retaliated, European exports could drop by about 17.5%. Still, with trade deals with some 74 international partners, the European Union has one of the largest networks of trade agreements in the world. In 2023, this network
Interesting. So the countries without any color, they have no agreement whatsoever?
has one of the largest networks of trade agreements in the world. In 2023, this network facilitated €7.6 trillion in trade, which is 16.1% of the global trade share, more than the bilateral trade that the EU does with both the US and China by a good margin. So the big question here is, if this rupture in the transatlantic trading relationship persists, can the EU use this network, or even add to it, to offset any economic harm? Well, unfortunately, none of the countries that the EU already has trade deals with can really replace the US in this respect, largely because none of them can match the demand that the US creates. Not only is the US an exceptionally wealthy country, but it also runs persistent trade deficits, meaning American consumers buy lots of European exports without Europeans buying equivalent amounts of American stuff. The EU has also somewhat lost its trade mojo recently, with prospective deals with Australia, India, Indonesia, and Merkasur all stalling.
Okay, but so at first I'm like, wait, what the hell?
American consumers buy lots of European exports without Europeans buying equivalent amounts of American stuff.
Yeah, exactly. On like my immediate ape brain is like, wait, what the hell? Why don't you buy as much things as we buy from you? But then a little seconds of contemplation, a few seconds, I'm like, well, make better things, and then I'll buy them. It's not like I hate you, or it's not like I'm not buying stuff out of you out of spite. Make better things for my market, and I'll buy it, you know? So I don't really know how we can complain about that. Like Trump says, you know, we have a trade deficit. We buy way more than they. Well, maybe we should see why that's the case instead of just flipping out and saying, tariffs until you match us.
Lots of European exports without Europeans buying equivalent amounts of American stuff.
I'm okay.
The EU has also somewhat lost its trade mojo recently, with prospective deals with Australia, India, Indonesia, and Merkasur all stalling, despite the massive potential. The main problem here is that it's really not an easy task to get 27 individual countries to agree on something, and the EU is short on political unity at the moment. Take the Merkasur deal, for instance, the South American bloc comprising Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. The deal, which would create one of the world's largest free trade zones, has been in the works for 25 years and has still not been clinched, exposing numerous rifts within the EU. Germany, for example, is a strong supporter of the deal and wants to see it concluded quickly, as it would open up Merkasur's protectionist market to German cars. On the other hand, France has held up the deal's progress due to staunch resistance from France's powerful farmers' lobby, which fears being undercut by a flood of agricultural goods from big South American producers. With that being said, Trump's tariff wars have apparently created a new sense of momentum. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who said earlier in April that amid Trump's trade war, countries are lining up to work with the EU, called to strike a free trade agreement with India this year, launched or relaunched talks with the Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, the United Arab Emirates, and others, and wrapped up talks on the Merkasur deal. In fact, some countries previously skeptical of the Merkasur deal have shifted towards the pro-deal camp, with the French trade minister telling Politico that Trump's trade war is a wake-up call on trade agreements. The odds of these deals happening are clearly rising, and this will probably be good for European consumers, who will get access to cheaper foreign goods. However, it might not be so good for European businesses and exporters, because, again, no other market can really provide as much demand as the US can. That is, except for the EU itself. Like America, the EU has a wealthy middle class that wants to spend lots of cash, but it's surprisingly hard for European businesses to reach these consumers.
So why is that? I mean, Merkasur, it kind of sounds familiar, but I've never really heard of it. Don't worry, I'm not going to replay all this stuff. But it probably has about the same population as the USA. Maybe not. I know Brazil on its own is like 220 million or something. Maybe not quite as much as the USA, but probably like 250 million people here. But is it because Americans on average have more interest in some or higher quality goods that cost more that European provides? And so if Europe wants to sell those more costly goods, America is just a better market for those?
By a flood of agricultural...
I know, I'm just kind of speaking out my, but these are serious questions I have.
Goods from big South American countries, previous minister telling deals happening to cheap, because, again, no other market can really provide as much demand as the US can. That is, except for the EU itself. Like America, the EU has a wealthy middle class that wants to spend lots of cash.
Okay.
But it's surprisingly hard for European businesses to reach these consumers because there are still lots of internal barriers to trade within the EU, despite the aspirations of the single market. When the European single market was originally conceived, the basic idea was that one big open market with free movement of goods, services, people, and capital would be better than lots of smaller markets within national economies. A single market would be better for consumers because there would be more competition and more choice, but also for businesses because it would be easier to do intracontinental trade and create a bigger consumer market to sell to. And yet, so far, the single market has failed to live up to its lofty aspirations, and progress has really stagnated since the Eurozone crisis, which has significantly weakened intra-European trade. According to a 2020 study by the IMF, Europe's internal barriers are equivalent to a tariff of 45% for manufacturing and 110% for services. This is far higher than the equivalent internal barriers between American states.
I would love to see how they come up with that number.
Services, equivalent to a tariff of 45% for manufacturing.
I'd really love to learn how they come up with that equivalent number, like how internal barriers are equivalent to tariffs. That'd be interesting to learn about.
And 110% for services. This is far higher than the equivalent internal barriers between American states, and explains why trade across EU countries is less than half the level of trade across US states. So why has the EU been so bad at essentially...
Well, yeah, again, you're comparing yourself to a single country. That's like saying the trade barriers between US states is different from the trade barriers between German internal states and areas. You know, so you're comparing yourself to a single country there. So
trading across US states. So why has the EU been so bad at essentially trading with itself? Well, it's in large part because the EU's limited political attention has long been focused on negotiating trade deals with other countries, rather than bringing down internal trade barriers. Paradoxically, the EU's enthusiasm for free trade deals with other countries has sort of exacerbated this problem, because it's made European businesses increasingly reliant on trade with non-EU countries
makes sense.
Rather than with other EU member states.
Makes sense. That makes complete sense. If you have countries like the U.S. prior to Trump second term who are not doing all these crazy non-free trade tariff things, then you have to worry more about your internal EU trade, but your internal EU trade isn't set up so cleanly because you didn't have to be set up so cleanly because you had places like the U.S. to trade to. That makes sense to me. Okay.
It's also because national governments are increasingly reluctant to cede power to Brussels, and national regulations aren't well harmonized, which makes doing business in another European country surprisingly difficult. More recently, anxieties about immigration have put pressure on freedom of movement, one of the central tenets of the single market, and more EU countries have started imposing restrictions on cross-border travel. These restrictions are supposed to be a temporary last resort measure reserved for exceptional situations, but quite a few EU countries have now essentially imposed them permanently and just renew them periodically. All in all, the point we're trying to make is that the
Well, then don't you just have to worry about the places, the EU countries where immigrants come in and worry about them and beef up security there, and then you'll be less worried about internal EU immigration, you know? Like, worry about the countries where immigrants that you don't want in Europe coming into, and beef up their security, and then you won't have to worry about internal EU immigration as much. You know, what the hell do I know? I could be wrong. So call me out if you think I'm wrong.
The best way to offset any transatlantic trade rupture would be to focus on removing internal barriers within the EU, which could unlock new demand for European businesses. At TLDR News, we're always trying to help you learn more about the world around you. Luckily for us, our sponsor this week, Brilliant, shares this same commitment. There are thousands of interactive lessons in maths.
It's a great video, guys. I'm going to play through the ad like always, but if you leave, then thanks for watching with me. I'd appreciate any comments down below. Now,
Science, programming, data analysis, and AI are designed to help you learn by actually doing, rather than asking you to mindlessly memorize stuff. For instance, each lesson is filled with hands-on problem solving that lets you play with concepts, a method proven to be 6 times more effective than watching lecture videos. This helps you build your critical thinking skills and become a better thinker. Brilliant's newly updated maths courses help you establish a strong foundation in algebra. It then helps you build on this, teaching you how to conquer calculus, all while maintaining an emphasis on problem solving and reasoning. The thing I like best about this, though, is that their mathematical courses help you develop your mathematical intuition and fluency, skills that you can use in the real world. As we've told you before, data skills are absolutely necessary for navigating the modern world, and Brilliant is one of the best ways to get them. To try Brilliant for free, visit brilliant.org/TLDR or click the QR code on screen.
Great video. Please use the promo codes if you're interested and you learn about it from watching with me, okay? Hope everyone's doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below. If you disagree with anything I said, call me out. I want nothing more than that for people who disagree. Call me out. Say I'm wrong and tell me why. We'd love to see it. Any comments at all, answering questions. You guys are always awesome down there. And hopefully I'll see you guys next time. We'll keep on learning. Bye.